Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer. Going to talk about the full moon in Aries coming up in just a few days' time, actually. So, tried to get this out as soon as I possibly could, and this was the fastest I could manage. Uh, wow, gee, there's been pretty interesting, pretty interesting events going on in the world, really, all year, of course. But yeah, just recently there's been a lot going on down here in Australia. As I know, there has been, of course, in other parts of the world, particularly US as well. Uh, so I have been really meditating on this upcoming full moon in Aries, um, really sort of drawing in what I consider to be the higher self, right, that we all have, tuning into the Chiron energy more specifically, because this full moon in Aries has a conjunction to Chiron. And I think that this conjunction to Chiron is really, really meaningful, really significant, and holds a lot of keys for really powerful journeys that we can embark on that would correlate more to a path of liberation or our path of individuation. And I say that for very specific reasons, and I'll unpack that as I get to talking more about the full moon. But it is a very important full moon. It's ruled by Mars because Mars rules Aries, and Mars is currently retrograde in the sign of Aries. So, whilst this full moon is represented by what we typically would say a masculine yang energy, because Aries is masculine and is yang, it's a cardinal sign which correlates to initiation, action, and new beginnings. And it's a fire sign which also correlates to action and taking us out, right? Um, the masculine principle or frequency is such that it takes us out of ourselves. There is no right or wrong in that. It's just the nature of masculine energy, whereas the feminine energy is inclined to pull us inside and withdraw and be more reflective. And there's a time and place for both, for the masculine and for the feminine. Now there's some, sort of debate or question marks or suggestions that um, to suggest that one sign is more masculine than feminine is not necessarily accurate. Um, I think when we think about the archetypes and the mythological narratives behind them, we need to understand um, the archetypes, the mythological narratives, which speak very clearly to each archetype, and some of which are more masculine, some of which are more feminine. It's just how it is relative to history and culture and myth, right? And in my opinion, Aries is quite a masculine sign. Um, but Mars being retrograde in Aries, which is the ruler of this full moon, suggests to me that the process of initiation relative to the archetype of Aries, which takes us out, is not necessarily an initiation that requires, or that we're even able to, let's say, um, take the action as such from an external level. The other thing that speaks to that even more is the fact that Chiron is conjunct this full moon. And Chiron is such a fascinating body to work with. It's when you're talking about working with the hidden components that exist within you that correlate to past lives, past life wounds, present life wounds. Um, the Chiron is the key to that. Chiron has the ability to access the transpersonal. And even astronomically, you know, the position of Chiron, which sits between Saturn and Uranus, that's why it's called the Rainbow Bridge, right? Because up to the point of Saturn, which it correlates to the traditional system of the planets prior to the transpersonal planets being discovered, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Chiron, relative to the consciousness of humanity, if you like, the awareness and the consciousness could only really go up to Saturn until the outer planets were discovered, which is really just pointing to evolution, right? So Chiron is the key that can take us out of the consensus reality into the individuated reality or experience or journey. And the individuated experience is basically about freedom and authenticity and liberation and being able to just present yourself, live your life totally authentically beyond the confines of the psychological structures of Saturn. Saturn is very important. I've always said that and I always will. And it serves a very important purpose and function in the structure of our life, in the conscious structure of our life. And it has to be that way. But we also have to, at some point, evolve beyond that. And the evolution beyond Saturn is really activated when we integrate Saturn and assimilate it into our consciousness, so we're not projecting it outside of ourselves and seeing it all around us, which is the typical thing to do. So Chiron holds this key in that point right there. And Melanie Reinhardt actually says that even in your birth chart, the midpoint between Saturn and Uranus is a very powerful midpoint in the chart. It's considered to be a chironic point, as it were. So you could have, for example, a particular transit at the moment, right? That's activating the actual midpoint of wherever Saturn and Uranus are in your chart, right? Because they will be in your chart somewhere. So whatever that midpoint is, that's a very potent midpoint if you're wanting to work with the chironic energy, which is fundamentally about healing. But, you know, it's in order to heal and to become more conscious, we need to endure the pain and the suffering. There's no evading pain and suffering. That's what consciousness takes us through. That's what becoming conscious essentially means. It means to confront our own deepest sufferings and wounds and pain and work through them with purpose and intention and consciousness and awareness. So I see this full moon in Aries as a powerful initiation point relative to our own evolution at the moment, and activating courage, right, to embark on a particular path or to facilitate further a particular healing journey that we are on. And also because the full moon, of course, is always about illumination, you know, things being lit up. The full moon is the sun and the moon opposite each other, and the moon is getting the light from the sun. So the full moon is the body of light that correlates to consciousness, awareness, illumination, clarity, seeing. It's whatever has been given birth to or has been cultivating is now at a point where it can actually be clearly seen from an objective perspective, right? And the thing about Chiron as well is that, and all the centaurs for that matter, they correlate to shamanic work, right? So most of you probably are aware that when it comes to shamanic work, there are many different traditions and approaches and so forth, but there's a known consensus sort of point, if you like, that correlates to shape shifting, for instance. And the centaurs pretty much did that. That's what they did. They would shape shift, you know, from uh, morphing from one point to another point into one body and another body and so forth. The centaurs are very strongly affiliated and correlated to the earth, right? Because they lived out in caves, they lived out in nature. They didn't really have much to do with the people on the in the cities. Rather, they were very much nature uh, uh, beings, you know, that worked with the earth's natural medicine, remedies, and so forth, and as did Chiron as well. But Chiron did work within both realms. Like he worked on the land. He had multiple caves where he lived and practiced and did all his shamanic work and teaching and healing and so on and so forth. But he also mixed with the people in the cities, because many of the gods and goddesses went to him for different types of remedies and healing and teaching and so forth. So, in other words, in our consciousness, Chiron is able to activate what's beyond the ego, the mind, the personality, in terms of transpersonal wisdom, knowledge, insight, and so forth, and enables us to activate it in our consciousness so that we can work through and heal whatever it is we need to heal, depending on who we are, our life journey, and so forth, relative to where Chiron actually is in your natal birth chart. So Chiron is, there were some points that Melanie Reinhardt made recently, and I just want to quote her. There's When you're working with Chiron's energy, there's a lot of different themes, but these are some of the themes that came up, right? So Chiron can correlate to what we can do for others or give to others, but we struggle to do or give to ourselves, right? That's one theme that comes up very strongly. The other theme correlates to sacrifice, a deep sacrifice that we experience. And the sacrifice brings up the matter of feeling that we lose something or we separate from something or someone that we really feel we can't be without. And it's those words don't really encapsulate that experience. I personally have been through that type of chironic experience, that the sacrifice and the pain that was connected to that was unbearable for me at the time. And it does correlate to my father transcending, which I've spoken about just ever so briefly, because it's been 3 years, but even in 3 years, I still struggle to communicate that journey and that story and that experience, right? But there were really significant things happening with Chiron in my chart when my father transcended. And that point that I just read out, which is the sacrifice that we make, and it feels like a loss and a separation of something or someone that we can't do without. That was exactly, if I was to encapsulate the biggest part of that journey, that's how I would describe it. You know, sacrificing, letting go of the one soul that means that, you know, there's no words to describe what that soul means to me. So I know what it is to live that journey, right, through Chiron's um, pain and suffering and healing ultimately, right? And the last point correlates to, or another theme rather, when you're working with Chiron's energy, what it can bring up is the feeling of being excluded or rejected or exiled, feeling of being exiled. That could be, you're feeling that you don't belong um, in the community that you associate with, or the family you were born into, or the school you went to, or the company you work for, or the world at large, feeling that you don't belong in this. You don't, it's very difficult to find your place in the world. That would be very typical if you had Chiron in the 10th house natally. um, so Chiron's work is, it's so beautiful, it's so painful, um, but it really wakes you up. And the Chiron journey is only embarked on really when you make that conscious choice, actually, and you're ready to integrate and assimilate the energy of Chiron, right? So it's not an easy journey to take, and that's why not many people are inclined to take it, right? So, but the point is that in this full moon that we have in a few days' time, Chiron is right there, right on that full moon. So that says to me that if we look back to Chiron in our own chart, and obviously where Chiron is transiting at the moment, which will be where this full moon is, you can think of this full moon as an opportunity to activate and to access material, insight, gifts, um, wisdom. It could just be one. It could just be one thing. It could just be one bit of information, or one aspect of vision, or memory. It can be so many different things, but it is a point of being able to activate into that Chiron's energy, in order to facilitate further your own healing journey and process at the moment. And the full moon there with Chiron, it just amplifies, it amplifies that energy of Chiron, right? So there are some other interesting, I want to talk further about this full moon, but before I do, I just wanted to point out some interesting things that have sort of transpired in the last couple of days. Mercury ingressed into Scorpio, right? Where Mercury will go retrograde, okay, on the 13th of October. Sorry, I've got a really painful neck at the moment. Now, this is the third time Mercury is going retrograde this year, and Mercury has gone retrograde this year in all the water signs. So it went retrograde in Pisces early in the year, and then it went retrograde in Cancer in July, the middle of the year, and now it's about to go retrograde next month in the sign of Scorpio. So the three water signs. Now, to me, that's not a coincidence, because nothing is a coincidence. When you have eyes to see that are beyond the physical eyes, you can make the connections, draw the correlations, make the observations from a much more meaningful position relative to your own understanding, right? So in short, when I think about Mercury going retrograde in the three water signs in 2020, relative to the context of everything we've been going through, it really speaks to a mental process, because Mercury is our mental processes, right? A mental process that has required us to internalize the data and information that we have been drawing upon, and taking it into layers and levels that correlate to the soul, because the three water signs, water correlates to the soul, period. Hence, the three water signs also connect to the soul in different ways, because the three water signs have their own unique characteristics, right? So we've been asked to really contemplate and reflect and internalize a whole bunch of data, thoughts, mental processes and analysis from a soul level in order to gain deeper, insight and understanding into our own soul and our own journey. That's why Mercury has gone retrograde in the 3 water signs. It's asking us to reflect and go in and go back. And because of the nature of reality in 2020, we've all been forced in that position anyway, whether we like it or not. So to have Mercury go retrograde in those signs just merely amplifies what we're being asked to do from an evolutionary perspective. Now, Mercury went into Scorpio on the 27th of September. Today is the 29th. And the first thing that came to my mind was, well, because of the sheer confusion in the information that's been provided to the world at large relative to this COVID-19 situation, there's been so much misinformation, misguided information. There's been errors. There's been, one would say, deliberate lies. There's, you can interpret it however you wish, but there has been a lot of information that hasn't been correct, right? So the first thing that I thought of, okay, well, Mercury in Scorpio, it's the lens of the eye that is an X-ray eye, right? So Mercury in Scorpio is going to be like the eagle, right? And it's going to dive very deep into the material relative to data and information. And what does Scorpio do? It exposes, okay? It uncovers whatever is hidden. Now, Mercury is going to be in Scorpio until the 2nd of December. Today is only the 29th of September. So we basically have Mercury in Scorpio going retrograde on the 13th of October, which will form an opposition to Uranus in the month of October a couple of times because of his retrograde motion. So that too says to me, not only is Mercury in Scorpio going to uncover some hidden things that have been hidden from us, from the people, from humanity, right? Relative to higher authorities, organizations, whether it's to do with medical realm, whether it's to do with governments, whoever, right? Mercury in Scorpio is going to dive deep, it's going to zoom in, and it's just going to drag it up, bring it up, and it's going to be seen. So in other words, we can expect to perhaps hear some larger truths, let's say, right, relative to what's been going on. And of course, in our own chart, it's always great to pay attention to where Mercury is transiting, especially when it goes retrograde, because that's the field, that's the area that it's working on in your life relative to what you can deeply examine, dive deep into, and really take a step back and reflect. And of course, with Scorpio, the process of Scorpio is always about death and rebirth. It cannot be not that. It just simply cannot. It is always about death and rebirth, transformation ultimately. And Scorpio enables us, we have resistance to this, but it does enable us to basically confront our own personal limitations, okay? So some of our personal limitations relative to Mercury in Scorpio could very well have to do with, certain perspectives and thoughts we have or have had on certain matters, whether it's, in our personal life or professional life or the world at large. So here's a chance to really, thoroughly investigate and go very deeply into certain matters in our own lives, right? And we can do a lot of mental purging as well, which is really healthy because we have over 50,000 thoughts flooding our mind every day. I was this morning when I was in the shower, because I'm just so aware of this, the left brain, just how busy it is, right? And one thing I've always been aware of is, and you can experiment this yourself, when you go for a shower, for some reason, the amount of thoughts that come flooding in while you're in the shower is just phenomenal. I had that experience this morning, and I thought, gee, I must have had, it literally felt like I had about 1,000 thoughts just go boom, just fly into my mind, as it were. And then I just showered that all off me, as it were, right? Point being that with Mercury in Scorpio, we can have a real powerful experience of mental purging of unnecessary, thinking and thoughts that are perhaps taxing or draining or negative, right? It's a cleansing, experience basically. Um, Now, when Mercury went into Scorpio the other day, I don't know if you guys have heard of a lady called Lindy Chamberlain. It's a very famous land case in Australia from back in the 1980s. So this lady was at a destination in Australia, which is in the centre of Australia, called Ayers Rock. It's a very famous um, landmark in Australia now, typically named or known as Uluru, right, which is the spiritual heart, the heart sort of chakra, if you like, of Australia. Lots of indigenous spiritual rituals and practices go on there throughout the year. There's a lot of things going on there at the end of this year, which I will speak about because it's going to correlate to the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in Aquarius, which is an extremely powerful phenomena that's taking place. But anyway, this lady was there with her family back in 1980. She had 3 children at the time. One was just a baby, like a toddler. And the baby was left in the tent, and it was taken by a dingo. A dingo is it looks like a dog, basically, right? Now, it's a very long story, and I'm going to do a video on this lady and her chart because it's worth showing the astrological symbolism relative to this particular woman's story, what she went through, what she endured. And it's a story that really only just recently came to some sort of closure, if you like, right? So it's like a 30, 40-year kind of story. But the point is this, that this documentary was released the day that Mercury went into Scorpio, and the documentary was based on the journey that this lady went through and the truth finally coming out. Because in order for you to understand what I mean by that and why this is important is because when she said that a dingo took her baby, no one believed her. Okay, everyone accused her of killing her baby herself. For many years, she endured so many attacks, allegations, abuse, you name it. It just went on and on. She ended up in prison as well. It's a long story, and she's got a really powerful yod in her chart. It's another reason why I want to do the video to demonstrate the power of a yod again. But when the documentary came out the other day, Mercury had just gone into Scorpio, and Mercury in Scorpio, as I said, is about uncovering mysteries and what's been hidden for a long time. And so out comes this documentary, which is about this lady's name being cleared, basically, because the truth finally has been presented. And I just thought that was a wonderful correlation and what some might call coincidence, right? I'll do a separate video on that because I think a lot of you will appreciate, especially those of you that are into yachts and things like that. There's just amazing stuff in her chart. And the Sabian symbol for her sun will blow your mind when I read it to you. Speaking of Sabian symbols, I find the Sabian symbol for this full moon in Aries just totally relevant. My Sabian symbol book fell apart just before. I've had a lot of these books for so many years, so I guess that's just what happens, right? So the degree of the full moon is 9 degrees. 9 degrees, yes. And the Sabian symbol, and I'm reading out of this Sabian symbol book. There's a few different Sabian symbol books around, but this is the one that I use, which is by Dane Rudger, of course. So the full moon is at 9 degrees, so we go to the subsequent degree, right, to get some kind of connection. Sometimes there is a connection, sometimes there isn't. It's sometimes it's a bit of a miss and hit with the Sabian symbols, but when it hits, it's phenomenal, right? Now I think this is one of those ones that speaks very strongly to this full moon in Aries conjunct Chiron. Remember, Chiron was a teacher. He was a mentor, a teacher, a healer of many different uh, modalities and practices. He had a lot of gifts. He was a very talented centaur. That's why he stood out from the rest of the centaurs, because there's literally so many centaurs. He wasn't the only one, but he was the one that stood out from the rest because he just had a very different way in his approach and how he connected with the gods and so forth, right? The other centaurs have a bit more of a rebellious, bad figure, bad guy reputation. You know, it's a long story, but Chiron was very different to that. So the keynote or the key phrase is a teacher gives new symbolic forms to traditional images. That's the title for 10 degrees of Aries, right? So the full moon's at 9 degrees of Aries, we read 10 degrees of Aries, okay? The teacher gives new symbolic forms to traditional images. You need to kind of dissect that within your own self, find the meaning relative to yourself and your journey. But, you know, in a general sort of sense, what this says to me, a teacher, Chiron, teacher, Chiron, right there with the full moon, gives new symbolic forms to traditional images. So remember, I said that Chiron is the body that is able to activate material from the past that can help us heal the past, the present, and step into the future, right? So this phrase here is saying that a teacher gives new symbolic forms to traditional images. So there's more emphasis, in other words, relative to how we access the inner teacher. You know, Chiron is an archetype that is expressed from within us, from all of us. We all have access to these energies, right? It's just that sometimes we are conscious of them, sometimes we are not. But when we do apply some consciousness, some awareness, some intention and purpose, then we activate Chiron within ourselves. We activate the higher self, the teacher within us. Sometimes it can be that we connect to a person around us who is a Chironic type figure. They're like a teacher or a mentor to you. That would be a Chiron experience, right? The keynote is revision of attitude at the beginning of a new cycle of experience. So there's something new being born, okay? And that, I think, this correlates to the fact that the full moon is in Aries. Aries is about new beginnings, always. So we have an opportunity here to draw in something symbolic in terms of images or messages or insights, right? That can really assist us in a beginning of a new cycle that we are actually about to endure or embark on, which would connect to past things, right? Because everything is connected in truth, nothing is separate. So I think this is a very powerful Sabian symbol. And just to read a bit further, he says, this phase is the fifth of the second fivefold sequences, and in it we find expressed the capacity to restate the problem inherent in the first phase, i.e., the problem of focusing one's energies upon emotional drives and cultural values which exclude far more than they include. The subsequent stages of development, taken together, have added considerably to this attitude. As a result, there arises in the consciousness, sorry, motorbike. I hate that growling sound that you might hear occasionally. That's a motorbike. Desire to, sorry, let me just start again. As a result, there arises in the consciousness a desire to reformulate at a new level much that had been taken for granted because it indeed originally had been an evolutionary necessity. The very concrete emotion arousing images of the past can now be reinterpreted as symbols with a wider scope of meaning. So you can reflect on that yourself and decide, what speaks to you out of that particular Sabian symbol. But, to put it in a nutshell, to summarize it, it's really just Chiron's energy there with the full moon is enabling us to activate. It's sort of hard to frame it because the what can be activated can be so many different things. It can be a memory, an image, a vision, a piece of information, a feeling. So it's not just one thing. It just depends on how you tune into the transpersonal realms as well. For instance, I have visions. I have experiences through visions. I have experiences through intuition and feelings. Sometimes I just get sudden flashes of thoughts coming in that are basically from Uranus, right? So it just depends on how you operate on that level. But that's the gift there, right? That's the opportunity. So where am I? Let me just bring up the chart and let's just have a quick look at that. I've pretty much covered what I wanted to cover, the main sort of highlights for this full moon. So here is the chart. This is the chart for Melbourne, Australia. So Australian Eastern Standard Time, which basically makes it the 2nd of October. But for you guys, you guys in the Northern Hemisphere, it will be the 1st of October. And of course, the chart will look different depending on your location. So don't worry about the position of where everything is in terms of the houses. It doesn't really matter. We're not analyzing that. What you need to look at is, where is this full moon in my chart? Where's Aries in your chart, in other words? That's where that full moon is going to light up that zone for you. That's where Chiron is at the moment as well. So it just depends on how old you are and what's going on in your life, right? You could be having a Chiron return. You could be having the Chiron opposition. You could be having a Chiron square Chiron. So where are you in the cycle of Chiron, in other words, which is a 51 or 50 year cycle, right? So have a think about that. It's worth really thinking about that because it's pretty important that this full moon is holding the vibration of Chiron there with it in the sign of Aries while Chiron is retrograde. Retrograde always means going within, right? Activating, connecting to, reflecting, feeling, sensing, hearing, experiencing, diving into realms that exist within, which I do this as in with my hand to indicate as if it's literally here, but it's not necessarily located here as such. It could be located anywhere really, but we just kind of do that I guess because we've got a physical body and we kind of have these references and frames, right? The point is that the experience, right, of going within it's literally an experience. So it's not it doesn't have any form. It's Pisces, 12th house. You know, you're diving into the boundless where there is no form and structure. You know, the other interesting thing that I think is worth mentioning is that there is an asteroid called Hermes. Some of you may or may not know that. And Hermes, of course, is Mercury, right? So the asteroid Hermes is literally, you know, it's a similar. Obviously, it has to be. It carries a similar frequency and signature like Mercury does, right? Because it is Mercury, basically. Okay, they're just the two different names. But there was an asteroid discovered, they named it Hermes. And Hermes is actually, is it conjunct or opposite? Let me just, yeah, it's it's conjunct this full moon. And it's actually at 7 degrees, which means it's right on Chiron. Now, we're talking about a full moon which can illuminate something in your own consciousness, in your own life, relative to Chiron themes and matters that you are consciously working through or not. And Mercury, the god of, or the messenger of the gods, who traveled in the upper and lower worlds and is going to go into Scorpio. Sorry, has gone into Scorpio, I meant to say, but will go retrograde later on in Scorpio. So here we have a theme of Mercury in Scorpio already taking us into these deeper experiences within ourselves relative to the soul desires, Scorpio. We have a full moon in Aries, which really empowers our intuition and instincts. We have Chiron conjunct the full moon, which is about activating material that's out of our everyday conscious mind and structure, personality and ego and form. And then we have the asteroid Hermes conjunct Chiron, meaning the ability to access further information again. And Hermes was, as I said, a god who had the ability to travel between both realms, the upper and lower. And so therefore, you know, retrieving messages from the gods and taking those messages into the underworld, right? Pluto's domain. So we need to understand that these are all archetypes, they're metaphors, it's symbolism, and we need to understand what these sorts of things imply uh, in our own life on a literal sort of level, if you like. So Hermes being conjunct this full moon then says to me that, again, there's just more opportunity for us to activate more material if we so wish. It's up to us, right? And Hermes, in terms of the asteroid, has this real cleverness, like a clever, and Mercury was a clever god. You know, he was the trickster, basically. So we need to, I guess we need to integrate that part of Hermes that can be very clever in, or ourselves, we can be really intelligent and clever relative to the information that we activate, invite, um, open ourselves up to, and how we use that information as well is going to be really, really important, right? Um, what else did I want to say about this moon? I think, you know, an Aries full moon is very fiery. Let's not forget that. Um, its ruler is Mars, and you know, Mars, of course, correlates to. Well, first of all, it's the lower octave of Pluto, so it speaks to our desires, but our conscious desires. You know, Pluto correlates to the unconscious desires, Mars correlates to the conscious desires. Mars is trying to activate and actualize the desires of the soul, Pluto, right? So Mars being the ruler of this full moon, because Mars is retrograde, and I touched on this in the beginning, it's probably going to be important to work with this energy with as much awareness as we can. And we can because it's a full moon, which means awareness. But Aries is not necessarily a sign that correlates to awareness. It's the beginning point of the zodiac, right? It's the infant of the zodiac. Um, it's the pure identity without anything having been shaped in any particular way yet. The shaping begins when you get into the second house, and then the third, and then the fourth, and the fifth, etc., etc. But Aries is literally just the instinctual self, basically. So our instincts can be really hyped up during this full moon, which is a good thing, because I'm a personal believer in your instincts don't lie to you if you know how to read them, especially. Your intuition never lies to you if you know how to listen to your intuition. And Aries is an incredibly intuitive sign. You know, in in esoteric astrology, Mercury is the ruler of Aries, right? Which is saying something about the ability to intuitively um, connect to the transpersonal realms and bring it through the mind, right? So, whilst Aries is ready to take action and to direct its desires and um, whatever it wants to do, whatever, you know, you may have a plan or plans for certain things to execute certain things. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's going to be a strong sort of desire to perhaps want to push or take action towards something. And I just think it's going to be important to be really aware of how you handle that situation, all right? Because Aries can be very impulsive, it correlates to anger. So it's a very fiery, inflamed kind of full moon if it operates at a selfish personality, egocentric level. But if we can use the energy with much more awareness, which the full moon enables us to do that, and work with the Chiron component that's speaking very strongly through this full moon, we can achieve something very, very powerful in our own personal journey. So, whereas normally a full moon in Aries might be a lot more active and dynamic on the external level, what I'm saying is because its ruler Mars, which is not far away from it, is retrograde in Aries, there might be some frustration because we want to take a certain type of course of action and initiate something on that external level. And there might be a lot of what appears to be blocks or limitations, because of course Mars is actually squaring Saturn and Pluto anyway. So, you know, Mars is being pushed back a lot, and we just need to figure out how do we use this energy of Mars internally, right, to further develop our own evolution. How do we use that energy um, with more purpose, with more awareness, with more consciousness? And it's a similar thing with this full moon, because the instinct or the impulse is going to be to want to forcefully sort of take action or charge towards something, and that can be a good or a, I don't like to use that language. That could be for the purposes of something that's really positive, or that can be for the purposes of something that's negative. The point is that we're going to have to really apply a lot of awareness to this, because we can find ourselves in a bit of a sticky situation. I think, you know, that can create a lot of inflamed circumstances, right? And bring unnecessary pain. So we just need to think about our actions during this time, I guess, just to put it very simply. Because Mars, as I said, if you have a look at it, there it is at 24 degrees retrograde, basically moving backwards, obviously, so coming into closing towards square to Saturn and Pluto, and that's a really challenging aspect, to say the least. That brings up a lot of frustration, especially when we've externalized this energy and we've projected it all around us. And it's hard not to do that because of the nature of events in reality at the moment, as in this earthly reality, with the uncertainties, the restrictions, the lies, the confusion, etc., etc. So I always say to people, don't worry about what you can't control. So work with what you can work with within your own self, in your own life. Um, the fact is, most things are out of our control anyway. So if we can shine the light towards what we can work with, we're likely to have a much more positive result and outcome, and we develop and grow in more meaningful ways through that kind of conscious sort of approach relative to our actions and what we're doing or not doing, thinking, not thinking, etc. So I think I will wrap it up there, and just be mindful of on the 5th of October, from around about the 5th, transiting Mercury in Scorpio. I'll just show you actually. So look, it's within range here. It's basically it's an applied opposition here. So you can see Mercury is at 3 of Scorpio. Uranus is moving retrograde at 9 degrees of Taurus, and as we continue to go forward, Mercury gets closer and closer, and by the 8th of October, which will be 7th of October for most of you, the opposition is exact. But I think the energy, builds up before that. It's obviously on that particular date, so it's whatever it's going to bring in, it's brought it in. But sometimes it can happen before the exactness of the aspect as well, in my opinion, through my observations. Okay. Now, Mercury-Uranus opposition is nothing to be afraid of. It's I think this is going to be an amazing aspect relative to collective events, because Mercury in Scorpio is going to dig up whatever's been hidden, and Uranus is going to bring in radical insights, truths, information that can come in very unexpectedly and suddenly. That's the nature of Uranus. But it can be very positive for all of us. There's a lot to gain from this, and relative to, so in other words, things will be revealed that might appear to be quite shocking, in certain ways, or you just didn't expect that government or that organization or whoever to say this, or to offer this information, or to present this in this way, and so on and so forth, right? So it'll be pretty unusual whatever comes out of this, but I think it's going to be really good, because Mercury in Scorpio is going to basically, as I said, dive deep in and bring up what's been hidden, right? Relative to our own life, this Mercury-Uranus opposition is a very powerful, it's a very powerful few days, and it happens again later in the month. I think it's about the around the 19th again of October, Mercury opposes Uranus again. So we've got this energy of Mercury Uranus through the month of October, bringing in unexpected, sudden flashes of insight. That, that can be mind-blowing in your own personal journey. So have a look at where Mercury Uranus is transiting in your own chart, right? And just think about what that could mean relative to your personal circumstances. But the other thing, I suppose, on an everyday, mundane, basic sort of level, it can create some weird kind of situations around communication, even just in your own personal life with other people. There can be experiences where somebody shocks you with some information they give you, or you shock them with information you give them. The communications can be a bit weird. Uranus rules electricity, so things are really electrified relative to the information and data that's coming through. And Mercury is in Scorpio, so it's going to bring in these layers that we normally don't consider or work with on a daily basis. Normally, generally, typically, right? So just watch that. It's a really interesting aspect, and it's great actually for if you're studying astrology, or you are teaching astrology, or you're doing a reading for somebody, or you're working on something in your own life relative to your own chart. This can be a really powerful few days where you can access some insight, some wisdom that can be really, really weird, but totally liberating. Because that's what Uranus is about. It's about authenticity, individuation, liberation, freedom. So when we can act, it's not easy to access Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. That's why we have Chiron there as part of that journey as well. But when we are ready, to assimilate these other components in our consciousness, then the integration can occur in a relatively smooth way, as opposed to resisting what comes through. In other words, whatever you are not ready for is bad news, to put it in very simple layman's terms. Whatever you are not ready for is not going to be embraced, is it? In other words, it's going to be resisted. So it's going to come in and it's going to create disruption and chaos in your life because you are not ready for it. But when we are working consciously with these types of cycles and energies and so forth, we can prepare ourselves, which places us in a situation where we can be more able to embrace, to accept, to confront, to be vulnerable, to be open, to examine. Okay. I think that's about it for today. I will come back and unpack some further things about the month of October. I'll try to do that in the next few days if I can. In the meantime, sending you guys much love, much blessings. Happy full moon in Aries. Draw from it the courage energy, the courage to look at your own pain, whatever that is. The courage to look at that, sit with that, not judge it, just sit with it, accept it. Because when we can stay with something, sit with something, we're not resisting it. The resistance stops a lot of things. Sometimes resistance is good and necessary because we're just not ready. Our psyche, our beingness, our soul, we're not ready. But we have to get to certain points where we are ready as well. We need to overcome a lot of resistances. So having the courage to sit with something that's really deeply quite painful, that's been difficult to sit with your entire life, let's say, because that is the case for some people. Some people will be going through that right now relative to Chiron's journey. And that's how the healing begins, because the healing is inside where the wound is. That's how you access it, how you activate it, not by resistance. So just some food for thought. See you guys soon. Much love, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.